Good morning, Opening Pathways viewers. This is Tom Lenoble. I'm so excited you've joined me for another podcast today. And today I'm super excited. I've been looking forward to this one. Burt Rosen is with me, and he is with Hold On to Hope. Burt, welcome to the show.
Tom, thank you so much. It's delighted to be on your show, and thanks so much for inviting me.
Oh, I'm thrilled about it. You've got so much to share with our viewers today, and I want to get started and jump right in. So, in the process of telling us a little about Hold On to Hope, I'd love for you to also tell us, which I think you will, of what sparked your idea to start this.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that. So, Hold On to Hope, we actually officially began in May of 2022, and it was sparked by Carolyn, who is my wife, and our quest as we were searching for our son who had been missing for close to 25 years. But that was coming on the heels of what had been almost 50 years in the people helping profession, if you will. So I'll jump back for just a second. I began as a volunteer at a small inner city halfway house in Miami, Florida, went on to become the director and was there for about 10 years. From there, I moved on to Prison Fellowship Ministries, which was an international organization where we worked with prisoners, ex-prisoners, and their families, and always touching the families where there was tremendous need, especially when you had a loved one who was incarcerated. From there, it was Knox Area Rescue Ministries, which was a homeless shelter in Knoxville, Tennessee, where, just to put that in context, we were home to about 500 men, women, and children every night. We served a little over 1,000 meals every day, and we had a variety of programs that were designed to respond to people in need, whether it was just out on the street and down on their luck, so to speak, women fleeing domestic violence, men and women who had been a bit addicted to drugs, and for those also who had gotten out of prison. And it was just towards the end of what was a planned retirement from there after 20 years that I began saying, okay, what's next? I've got way too much energy to sit down and do nothing. And it was as if I heard this small whisper in my voice that said, don't waste it. And that was after watching a movie that I won't take the time to go into now that really inspired me not to waste all the experiences over the years, but in particular, mine and Carolyn's personal experience searching for a missing son and that battle that comes with being inspired and hopeful to those moments where you've completely lost hope. And we realized that what would be next for us was to try and be a support to the many, many people out there, 600,000 people on a missing persons list that we know of, who are just trying to hold on with the hope that their missing loved one would be found. And that's kind of directed our next calling, if you will.
I love this story, Bert. Viewers, this is an example, Bert and his wife, of a life of service to others. And for those of you that are involved in service, you have an idea of what we're talking about here. For those of you that have not stepped into that realm yet, I know and I'm sure Bert would encourage you to consider it because you get back far more than you ever give. You hear that often from people, and I know and I'm sure Bert will tell you it is so true that helping other people and this life of service, at least a part of your life, is very, very rewarding. Bert, I need to know something. I want to know what role models or mentors, what happened early in life that shaped this wonderful human I'm looking at who's dedicated his life to service to others.
Well, you're very, very kind to say that, Tom, and I appreciate that. I think the seeds of this actually began at a very young age, when my father ended up in jail. That resulted in my parents getting divorced, and my mom, who was not well educated, doing her best try to raise myself and my two sisters. But I also learned how kids at that age can be so tough. And so I kind of grew up as the jailbird's kid. And actually, I didn't want to have anything to do with anything that touched jails, prisons, or people in need, despite the need that we had in our own family. And for us, that meant poverty. My grandfather did his best to help out. But when you're young and you don't have very much, and you're trying to piece together two shirts and two pairs of pants to make it look like you're wearing something fresh, every day, I understood firsthand what that felt like. And as I got started in career, I actually was managing a firm that manufactured cultured marble sinks and bathtubs. And we were a nationwide organization. And I was asked to move to Lima, Peru to help start the business there. And I turned it down. And I quickly found myself volunteering at a small halfway house in Miami, which is where we were from, just doing whatever I could to help out while I was also pounding the pavement looking for what my next gig was going to be. I never expected to stay there for 10 years, but it's like sand in your sneakers at the beach.
That's
You get it in there and you can feel it on your toes. And try as you might to bang those sneakers and shake them, you never get the sand completely out. And so those seeds for helping people were really born as I began to volunteer. And I got to know the people. They weren't just numbers somewhere. These were men and women who had done something that landed them in prison. And I really didn't think that I would be there that long. It was an interim gig, but it got inside of me. And I realized then, God, you've got something in store for me that will allow me to pour into the lives of others. And so that's where it all got started. And that was what led to those many, many years at Riverside House in Miami, Florida, which was in the inner city of Miami. But that's when it really got in my bloodstream. And I had an intuitive sense that the rest of my life would be spent trying to help others. I didn't know exactly where, but I just knew what made me bleed inside.
Yes, I love the sand in the sneakers. So I want to try and save till the very end the outcome of this story with your son. So as I ask you these questions, if we can try and do that, it would be great for the viewers today.
Sure enough.
But I want to know, I want to dig in a little deeper. As you started doing this latest work that you and your wife are working on, have you ever doubted your vision?
Yes. Um, we doubted whether or not two people could really do anything for the masses. And so we were rooted in this firm belief in the power of hope. And we knew how much hope meant. We saw it in the homeless shelter where we were serving so many people. We saw it when men and women were getting out of prison and it was hard to find a job and all of the things that are part and parcel of that. So we always knew the power of hope, but exactly where we were going to apply that as we were now moving out of the work that we were doing at the homeless shelter. We had this firm belief that we have something to offer. But I made the comment, don't waste it. And so many of us, I think, can waste what life brings our way. And regardless what one philosophically believes or where one stands in their faith life, wasting what has happened in your life is a tragedy in and of itself. And so because we still had energy, we still had life, we still had breath, we knew we were going to help others. But it's not, excuse me, helping others is really, for lack of a better term, it's not a high numbers game. When someone is looking for all of the data that shows how many people you've reached and all those things that typically fuel nonprofit organizations, we don't have that. Oftentimes the phone wouldn't ring. And we'd be waiting. Is anybody out there? Does anybody really care that Hold On to Hope even exists? And we have learned anecdotally, although not statistically, that it does because of the calls that we get from people. And sometimes all of us can wonder, does what I do matter? Does
Yes.
what I do make a difference? And so there are so many drivers in the nonprofit world, and any of your listeners who have been a part of that nonprofit arena know that you have to appease your funders. If you're going after grants, how many, how much of this is getting done? And I had to contend with that all of my years in nonprofit life, a little over 50 years. We always did that. And so when you've been going at 80 miles an hour on the turnpike and then you hit a school zone, going even hitting a normal speed zone, going from 80 to 40 feels like you're crawling. And so as we found ourselves crawling, we wondered, does anybody give a hoot? Does it really
Yeah.
matter that we're doing something? But talk to the people that we've talked to, and we know we do. And so that's what fuels our jets. We don't have a large budget. We're not government funded. We're not getting money from United Way or any of those organizations. We've been fortunate in our life. And so we're able to do this without taking any salary from it. But that doesn't change waking up every day, knowing that there's people out there that are hurting. And why have you placed us on this earth? Why have we gone through these experiences? And how can we now help others?
Thank you. I know I remind myself sometimes when I feel like my work isn't in this arena isn't big enough or I'm not making a big enough impact. I always remind myself, well, I helped that one person. If
Right.
nothing else, I helped that one person. And I'm sure, like me, you believe about the ripple effect that when we do for others, we trust that, and we know in some form or fashion that will be carried on. And being willing to let go of that outcome and just trust is part of knowing that you're serving. And it makes such a difference. I'm interested when you look back, did you take a personal risk that nobody else knew about as you started doing this work?
In the early years, I don't think there was much risk, although it was a leap of faith to step out and become a volunteer at a halfway house where I wasn't getting paid for what I was doing. And then when they can finally afford to pay me, um, so here was the risk, if you will, although we didn't know it at the time. Um, we could not afford to, excuse me, we could not afford to maintain our automobile insurance. And so we had to give up our car. We could not afford to maintain where we were living. So we had to move into a smaller apartment. Kids came along and we had to put them on the bicycle seats in order to go to the laundromat or to go to the grocery store. And I don't think we ever realized that that was going to end up happening. And so when I made the decision to decline going to Peru to start the business with the marble business, I knew that was going to cost me something, but I didn't think it was going to cost me that. But I don't think I ever sat there and said, what are the risks? Now, my first real sense of risk came when I joined Prison Fellowship Ministries, where they were moving me from Miami, Florida to Louisville, Kentucky, wife, two kids, at a fraction of the salary that I was previously earning. And I thought, okay, can we do this? This is going to be risky. We're moving away from everything we know. What if it doesn't work out? And although we'll allude to talking about finding our son a little bit later, it after we worked for Prison Fellowship for 17 years, there was this sense of, okay, something else is stirring now. And you get that gut feel, that rumbling in your stomach that tells you that change is in the wind. You don't know what it looks like yet, but you know it's coming. And so when we made a very conscious decision to respond to an invitation from the homeless shelter in Knoxville to go, that we felt a real sense of risk. A, it was going to be less compensation. We were moving away from our kids. They were old enough to be on their own. And we were moving away from everything we knew, every comfort that comes with being in familiar territory. And what if this doesn't work? And we actually had that experience early on after I began at the organization. Quick hits on why that would have been. When I stepped in, we were on a July-June fiscal year. I started in May. We were about to finish that fiscal year a little more than $500,000 in the red. We had two thrift stores that were losing a combined $100,000 a year. The culture inside the organization was horrendous. And downtown back then looked like a lot of downtowns do when they're very blighted. And I remember Carolyn, I said, what have we done? We got no business being here. What if this doesn't work? And I remember going to the board of directors and saying, I've made a mistake. I think you've made a mistake. And I hate to say this, but I'd really like to go see if my old role at Prison Fellowship is still available. Well, as it would turn out, I began walking the streets. And it was because I'm a believer in God. God, help me to see with your eyes, hear with your ears, and feel with your heart what I'm supposed to be doing here, because I do not understand. And I heard that little voice whisper in my ear. And in scriptural references, there's Balaam's donkey standing in the middle of the road. I didn't see donkeys. I didn't hear handwriting, see any handwriting on the wall. But I knew that I was supposed to persist in this work and would go on to do that for the next 20 years until we got to where I was talking about, where we had a planned transition and I stepped in to hold on to hope.
Amazing. Tell me, how did you gain traction with your first donors? What was that like?
Well, uh we didn't have my predecessor kept all of the larger donors close to his vest. And he had been gone for 2 years by the time I got there. So I said, let me see the file. Who is supporting us? Well, what we were finding was he did not trust any of the other staff with those level of relationships. So it was if you're starting a fundraising program from scratch. But what I did do is I looked to see what the history was, what I could find, and I began calling on people, mostly just to introduce myself to them. And so you're the new guy on the block.
You're the new
And
guy.
yeah, and so it took a while for people to stop asking me. I won't name my predecessor, but if you were one of those donors, Tom, the first thing you'd be asking me is not, what am I doing? Why am I here? So where is so and so? And it took a while, and I then became accustomed to that. What they want to know is what happened to my predecessor? Where is he? And why is he not calling on me? Well, I finally made that transition to where now I'm calling on you because I want to understand what has motivated you to give to the organization in the past. Why have you continued or why have you stopped giving? And what is it that I might be able to do to help you fulfill your heart's desire? But it's like that drop in the pond. You throw the pebble in the puddle, and you get this ripple effect. Well, word of mouth in a community like Knoxville is very strong, and they either love you or they hate you. And it took me a while to win the trust because I wasn't from around these parts. I wasn't a Southerner. I didn't know the Southern stories. I didn't have all of that going for me. And so it took a while to begin to build credibility in the minds of those donors. And so once that happened, we began to see um, things begin to spin in a different direction. And by that, um, we fixed our thrift stores, a whole nother story there. But in meeting with the donors, it was one on one. And instead of having transactional relationships, this was a relational piece that we were looking for. I wanted to build relationships with people, not do the big chicken dinners. People write a check and they go home. There's nothing wrong with that. Organizations need that. And that was a part of what we did. But when all is said and done, I want to get to know Tom. I want to know what Tom makes you tick. And I learned something from a guy that had joined Prison Fellowship years before. And even though I wasn't on his team, I learned a lot from him. And as he hired new people in the development shop, he said, for the first year, you're not asking for any money. Go out, build relationships,
Relationships, yes.
put deposits, and eventually you will come to a point where you'll make a withdrawal. Uh, but donors are not an ATM machine.
Yes.
They're real people giving, some more sacrificially than others, but they're giving from their heart. And they want to know that what they're giving to is making a difference in people's lives.
Yes.
And once you get to that spot, you recognize the importance of relationships in every aspect of life. But if you're a fundraiser out there, people want to know you. They want to know how their dollars connect to what it is you're trying to accomplish as a mission. And so that's what those early years with our donors were like. And we saw the attrition that was on the donor file. We saw that reverse. And our donor file grew and it grew and it grew, all by
Yeah.
persistence and not making an ask the first thing you do every time you meet somebody.
Yes. As my dear friend Dr. Jacob Lieberman says, heart to heart. Um,
Exactly.
you build heart to heart relationships. So tell me, what did those early days teach you about trust?
That's a great question. Um, I think what I learned in those early years, Tom, is that number one, I had to trust myself. I had never done this work before, and I had to trust myself that somehow my innate abilities were going to be able to pay off here. The other things is I had to have trust in my fellow workers. This was not going to be Burt Rosen coming in as the Messiah that's going to save the organization. These are talented people who have committed their life to doing the same work that I'm doing, and they're going to make mistakes along the way. But just because I don't agree with it doesn't mean it's a mistake. It just means I didn't agree with it. But you learn to trust yourself. You learn to trust in a power that's greater than you, and you learn to trust your coworkers.
Great. I have learned that some of my biggest mistakes were my biggest teachers. And I've also learned that life isn't just a continuum. It's a series of we could call them ups and downs. And I find those, what we perceive as downs, are a place where we can learn and then express what we've learned during the up times, knowing that as life unfolds, often there's something coming to teach us another lesson or a mistake we might make that we can learn from, just like we do our successes. I'm curious, what mistake taught you more than any success did?
Being desperate to fill certain positions and making a bad hire
Yes,
instead of waiting it out, and the the debilitating effect of hiring the wrong person because you feel pressed to get the spot filled because the work feels overwhelming. And I hired two wrong people. The first person I hired that was a wrong person. I said, "Okay, Bert, learn from that one. Don't make that same mistake again."
yes,
And then Tom, I almost turned around and made the exact same mistake again because you feel the pressure. And so, yeah, I've made some incorrect organizational decisions along the way, but the most biggest mistakes that I made that had the biggest organizational impact when I hired the wrong people for key leadership positions that really were
yes.
necessary to move the organization forward. That was a lot to recover from.
Yeah. Yeah, I talk with this topic with clients a lot. I call it desperation hiring. And desperation hiring will always come back to bite you. It may be a week, it may be a month, it may be a year, but those times when we override what we know to be true, thinking we're getting some short-term fix, typically doesn't work well. Even though we feel at the time we have no choice, it's desperation hiring can often come back to bite us for sure.
It certainly can, and I'll add to that, Tom, that instinctively a leader knows when he or she has made the mistake, and then they're fearful to pull the trigger. In carpentry, measure once, cut twice. And once
Yes,
I know that I've made a mistake and this person isn't a fit, the mistake is to keep it going, despite the discomfort that comes from having a hard conversation. Um, and what I learned from all of that after getting through some of the bad hiring decisions that I made is to trust my gut. And if it's not working, it's not working.
yes,
And
yes.
chances are we already know that. But then as a leader, I fail to act on it. And I remember in one of those, going back to the board, because the board gave me glowing employee reviews every year. And I said, I've got to confess to you a mistake that I made that you don't even know I made, because the board's not close enough to the day-to-day action. And I said, I made a decision to keep a woman on board, thinking that I could save her and rescue her. So I was willing to pay for her coaching and all of the other stuff. And but that mistake had a deteriorating effect on the rest of the team. So as the senior team is watching her behavior and watching my behavior, what they're quietly saying to themselves, why is he continuing to let her stay on? And I saw the effect of that in so many ways. Some you could see on paper, others you couldn't. And I remember apologizing to the team and then apologizing to the board for having made a mistake that was very costly to the team from a morale standpoint and very costly to the organization because of lost momentum.
Wow. Have you ever said no to growth because it just wasn't aligned with your beliefs?
Yes. Um, the that was we would have seen primarily. at CARM, Knox Area Rescue Ministries, where I mentioned that we were starting out 500,000 in the red, and so we looked at our thrift stores, and it was fix them or forget them. And so I got the right people around me, and we went and visited, and we came back and decided to fix them. And what was beginning to happen was we went from two stores losing $100,000 a year to now breaking even, to now making money. And so and this was me and the guy that I brought alongside with me, scratching things out on a napkin over breakfast about how we were going to move forward. But it was growing faster than we anticipated. And so what was starting out as an eight-store chain in Knox County, the press was now to grow more. We can do more. We can grow more. We can make more money. I said, I don't want to make money just for the sake of making money. If it's helping us fulfill a need now or in the future, I'm okay with that. And so I pushed back on the thrift store growth. Now they have grown and we grew while I was there, but early on in those years, it went against my grain that an organization was struggling and wanted to be a donor driven organization, not an enterprise driven organization, caused me to say no. And but the benefit, what ended up happening in that was by saying no, it allowed other parts of the organization to get the needed growth that it needed so that we
Yes.
would not become a chain of thrift stores wagging the dog of the mission, if you will. The thrift stores would become an integral part of our income portfolio over the years. And so the stores did grow, but it was controlled growth, and it would have grown faster if I had let it just go. And what we have found now was that allowed them to get their sea legs underneath them and allowed it to grow at a continued pace while we continued to grow our catering business and other things that we were doing so that we could put people who were homeless back to work. I think if I had said, okay, go for the gusto, let's get all the money we can and just bank it, would have been a mistake. But it was going against what I stood for, and I didn't want to be a money driven enterprise, even though you got to pay the bills, and I get that.
Yes.
And as a result of that, we became healthier and healthier and stronger, and it was planned growth, but always tempered with this bent towards innovation. So I always wanted us to be innovating, not waiting until we were responding to a crisis, but thinking out into the future. And, um, a friend of mine used to say the opportunity of a lifetime has to be seized in the lifetime of the opportunity. And so we would get more adept at evaluating opportunities that were come our way and looking, this is a no because it's inconsistent with where we're trying to go as a mission. It doesn't fit our model. We're doing it just to get the money. And that was a hard line no.
Wow. Bert, you are a shining example of things that I hold dear to my heart and what I work with others. You are risk, resilience, and renewal living and breathing right here in front of me.
Mm.
What value do you protect most when no one's watching?
The core value of who I am as a person. And so my life is rooted in my faith. And so, in one sense, I try to be all things to all people, but inside, always looking at who I am, who Tom is seeing on the camera today. Is that who I am when we're not on camera? Am I true to myself? And the Burt, what you see is what you get in Burt, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak. But I know internally when I've crossed that line, even if no one else knows it. I know that I've crossed the line and I can feel it. My body's telling me, my head is telling me, Bert, you said you weren't going to do that, and you did. And so I try and protect that as best I can. And that has to do with um, the levels of friendship that I develop. I like to be friendly with it, but those closest to me, they share my values. And the value of a friend who will look you in the eye over breakfast and say, Bert, you said this was important to you. And hey, I'm just saying, I'm seeing you wandering a little bit. And it reminds me of that old, there used to be an old Aquavelva commercial on TV where the guy would get the slap on both sides of the face and he would say, thanks, I
Yes.
needed that. And so it becomes a thanks, I needed that, even if I don't really want to hear it,
Yes.
because in my mind, I'm the smartest guy I know when it comes to me. And but I know when I've crossed that line. And so
Yes.
protecting who I am, why I exist, and what I'm on this earth to do becomes the things that I try and protect.
Yeah, we need those friends in our life. Tell me, what is your boldest vision for Hold On to Hope for the next 5 years?
That anyone, anywhere, anytime who feels the pain of a missing loved one and just needs someone to help them hold on to that hope that they feel slipping from their fingers anywhere in the world, they would be able to reach someone and get the support they need and they're looking for.
So tell me, if your younger self were to be watching this podcast that we're making, what would you say to him?
Or you never saw this coming, did you? Um, and I didn't. And so I was reading something the other day. It does come from the passage of John, but this hit me like it never did before, and this is where it would come in. It's talking about the Last Supper, and I'm not making a religious comment as much as I am here capturing a phrase. And it tells the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet at the Last Supper, and he takes his outer garment off, basin of water, and he's going around washing everybody's feet until he gets to Peter. And Peter says, you're not going to wash my feet. And here's what he said to him: You don't understand what I'm doing now, but one day you will.
Yes.
So for me to now look back and see, Burt, remember all of those things, Burt, if you had trusted a little more, if you had stretched a little more, perhaps some of the things that you had to go through, you wouldn't have had to go through. Um, that's what I'd be telling myself. Learn to trust, learn to lean in, and learn to let life flow. But be smart enough to know when you're getting ready to step in a pile of rattlesnakes.
Yes, 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 yes. Be wonderful. I want to know, um do you have one thought, one challenge actually that you would leave the listeners with today?
Yeah, I think it's a cue from a book that I read some time back, Death by Meeting by Pat Lencioni. And so it kind of revolves around these six questions. And he's taking in an organizational context. Why do we exist? How do we behave? What do we do? How will we succeed? What's most important right now and who must do what? And so as I internalize that, as your listeners internalize that, why do I exist? How do I behave? What is it I'm going to do? How am I going to succeed, however you define success? What's most important in your life right now? The most important thing. And what he says is everything's important, nothing's important. What's most important? And then what do you got to do to get there? Ask yourself those questions internally. And as you find the answer to that, go for it. And I think the second thing, Tom, comes from a book called Our Iceberg is Melting by Tom Cotter, and story of a colony of penguins who resist change. And they said, if we keep doing what we always did, we're going to die on this iceberg because it's melting. Ask yourself, are you on an iceberg that's melting? And are you brave enough to move instead of staying stuck where you are?
Yes. This is I can't think of a better way to start my Friday at 5 a.m. than this time with you. It's been inspirational, it's been empowering and transforming, Bert, and I thank you for that. Now you must tell our viewers your son's missing for 24 years. What happened?
Yes. How long do we have on that? So I leave out because it's a long story, but I want to be concise.
Give us the concise version.
Yeah. Okay. So we made the painful decision many years ago after our son dropped out of his third year at Virginia Tech on the advice of someone whose counsel we trusted, who said, if your son's not going to get help, you may need to ask him to leave. Little did we know that when we asked him to leave, we would never see him again. Now, fast forward, I've got him Googled in every which way to Sunday, daily alerts, immediate alerts, and so on and so forth. And for 24 years, 22 years, um, that's what I did every day. Started my morning with my own devotional readings and then looking at all the Google stuff. But certain things began to happen. One, I ended up at a speaking engagement with the head of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. That led to him assigning a special agent to us who said, "We can help you if your son is missing," to a phone call from the city of Pittsburgh Police Department saying, "We're taking your son off the missing persons list because we just spoke to him 30 minutes ago." And my wife pleading, saying, "Tell us where he is. Are you a mom? Do you get this?" And she said, "Well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but he's somewhere in Alaska," which made no sense to us whatsoever. Well, now that he was no longer missing, TBI couldn't help us. They said, hire a private investigator. We don't know one. Well, my best friend is a retired FBI agent, lives in Knoxville. Let me introduce you to. He introduces us. We run into a dead end. We end up getting a letter from the Seattle Housing Authority addressed to Matthew at this address, which we never should have gotten, and they don't know how we got it, and we don't really care. We got it. A friend out of nowhere that I hadn't heard from in 15 years sends us an email asking, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Great, it'd be good to catch up on a phone call." Well, I'm 4 hours difference time. I'm living in Alaska now. So now
Uh,
you have another Alaska connection. We ended up calling the different rescue missions. None of them had seen or heard of Matthew. And so now we came back to our FBI agent here after talking to the Alaska State Police, finally there. And he said, "Well, one of my dearest friends is retired from the Alaska State Police after 28 years. He lives right here in our community." He introduced us. That person put us in touch with a private investigator that lives in Juneau, Alaska, who began searching all of the public records and so on and so forth. And one thing led to another. So now, after multiple delays over a number of years, the Alaska Permanent Fund became one of the things that helped us find him. Because if you're a resident of Alaska, you get a check every year from this fund that was struck during the Alaska pipeline years. Well, turns out that they published the names, but no other identifying data. And our PI was able to track him down. And so after 3 years
wow.
of going through this, he comes back to us and he says, "We found him. At least we think it's him, because nobody knows if your ID has been stolen or compromised." So nobody had made face contact with him, but we have a street address, an email address, and a cell phone number. And we said, "We're going." And so we got on a plane. Our two daughters flew in. Our other son couldn't make the trip. And so now we're actually finally in Fairbanks. And people had been telling us, all well intentioned, "Carry some mace with you. Don't go alone. You don't know what his mental health is going to be," and so on and so forth. And so when we drove over there that day, expecting to knock on his door and not know what we were going to see, because our Seattle to Fairbanks flight got canceled, we had to fly the next day. We ran into another hiccup the following day on our schedule, and we are now actually turning into the dirt road that we're going to have to travel about a quarter of a half a mile to knock on Matthew's door. He's walking to his mailbox at that exact moment. And he said, "I only check my mail, once or twice a week at best, at whatever time I feel like it." Our daughter, 16-year-old, well, she was 16 then, said, "That's Matthew. I'd know him anywhere." And so we turned the car around, completed our turn. Carolyn, my wife, says, "Matthew," and Matthew looked up. We got out of the car, and I said, "Matthew?" And he said, "Yeah." Like who's asking? I said, "It's me, your dad." And that moment, we were frozen right there in time. The family hugged, but not Carolyn. She was stunned. She couldn't move. Matthew would later go over and hug her. And then afterwards, he said, "So you want to come hang out?" And that was the beginning um, of connecting with him for what is now daily calls between my wife and him. I talk to him a couple of times a week. He talks to
Amazing.
his siblings, and he's now going to be coming here for Thanksgiving. We're going to fly him to his brother in Pittsburgh. They're going to drive here together. And so it's a rebuilding process, but we never gave up hope. We maintained the persistence. and an intervention with dots being connected that still can't explain, but you have a sense that there was some power up there working on our behalf,
Yes.
connecting dots that should not have been connected. And it's
Yes.
been amazing after all these years.
Another story here today of risk, resilience, and renewal. Burt Rosen and your wife Carolyn of Hold On to Hope, thank you for being with me today on Opening Pathways. Burt, please tell the viewers if they are interested in donating to Hold On to Hope, how they might do that.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. You can go to our website, which is hold the number two, followed by the word hope.org. So holdtohope.org. And then you have to look for it because it's at the bottom of the page. There's a little donate button, and we don't take any government funds or anywhere else. So it's only the generosity of others and people like perhaps your listeners who want to support that work. There's 600,000 people out there, Tom, on the NamUs Missing Persons database. And it would not be surprising to me if some of your listeners don't have someone that's either on that list or knows someone on that list. And sometimes they just need someone to help them hang on. That's what we do. You helping us helps us help others hang on. Thank you.
Thank you, Burt. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you, Tom. It's been wonderful. Time flew by way too fast.
Yes, it has. We'll do it again. How about a round two down the road a bit? So, and to my viewers, thank you for being with me today on Opening Pathways, and I'll see you next time.